The sound of sirens cut through the quiet afternoon air. I froze, my hand still gripping the wooden post I was hammering into the ground. Dust swirled around me as the patrol car turned into my driveway, tires crunching on the gravel. The flashing lights reflected off the half-built fence that stretched neatly along the edge of my property. Karen, my HOA neighbor from down the street, was already standing near the mailbox, waving her arms like she was directing traffic at a parade. Her face was red, her hair frizzed out from the humidity, and her mouth was moving faster than the officer could even step out of his car. "There," she pointed furiously at me. "He's breaking the HOA code. That fence is illegal. He's ruining the view of the neighborhood. You have to stop him." The officer, a tall man with calm eyes hidden behind sunglasses, looked at me, then at the fence, then back at Karen. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "is this your property?" "No," Karen snapped, "but it's our HOA's property line. He can't just build whatever he wants." I could feel the anger rising in my chest, but I tried to keep my voice steady. "Officer," I said, wiping my hands on my jeans, "I've got a survey map in the shed. The fence is on my property, every inch of it." Karen scoffed. "Oh, please, he's lying. I've lived here for 10 years. I know where the property lines are." The officer sighed and looked at both of us. "All right," he said, "let's take a look at that map." And that's when everything changed. I remember walking back toward my shed with the officer following me, Karen marching right behind like a shadow that refused to disappear. My heart was pounding. I had spent weeks measuring the boundaries, marking the posts exactly where the map said they should go. But even with proof, I knew how these things could go wrong, especially when you're dealing with someone like Karen. As I pulled open the shed door and grabbed the rolled-up survey papers, the officer's radio crackled. Karen folded her arms and huffed loudly. "This is ridiculous," she muttered. "People like him think they can just do whatever they want." I unrolled the map on the hood of the patrol car, pointing to the clearly drawn boundary lines. The officer leaned closer, tracing the lines with his finger. His expression didn't change at first, but then he looked up at me and nodded. "Well," he said quietly, "it looks like your fence is exactly where it's supposed to be." Karen blinked. "What?" The officer adjusted his sunglasses and gave her a look that said everything. "Ma'am, this fence is on his property. You don't have any authority here." Karen's face went pale. "That can't be right. That can't be right." But the officer was already turning back toward his car. "You might want to check with your HOA before calling us again," he said. "This isn't a police matter." He climbed back into his car, leaving Karen standing there speechless. The engine started, the tires crunched, and in seconds, the red and blue lights disappeared down the road. Karen just stood there staring at the fence like it had personally offended her. I wanted to laugh, but I also felt tired. Tired of always having to defend myself for just trying to live peacefully on my own land. Still, I didn't say anything. I picked up my hammer, turned back to my fence, and drove another nail in. But I didn't know then that this was only the beginning. Karen wasn't the type to let things go. She was the kind who smiled at you when the neighbors were watching, then filed complaints behind your back. And something in her eyes that day told me, this wasn't over. Now let's rewind. It all started 3 weeks earlier, when I first decided to build that fence. I had moved to this quiet suburban neighborhood 5 years ago, after leaving the city to find some peace. My little half-acre lot backed up to a patch of woods, and for the most part, it had been peaceful, until Karen became head of the HOA board last summer. The moment she took over, the rules started changing. Suddenly, lawns had to be cut exactly every Saturday. Trash cans couldn't be out past 7 a.m. on pickup day. Even the color of your front door had to be HOA approved. But what pushed me to the edge was when she started using my backyard as her personal shortcut to the walking trail. I'd find footprints near my shed, candy wrappers on the grass, and even once, her dog digging near my garden. At first, I tried to be nice. I told her politely, "Hey, I'd appreciate it if you didn't cut through my yard. It's private property." She just smiled and said, "Oh, don't worry. I'm the HOA president, so I'm allowed to inspect for community standards." Inspect? My backyard? That's when I decided to build a fence. A tall, clean wooden fence. Not to block anyone's view, but just to mark what was mine. I spent days researching local codes, bought the materials myself, and even hired a surveyor to ensure every inch of it stayed within my property line. When I started digging post holes, I noticed Karen watching me from across the street. Her arms were folded, her lips pressed tight. On the third day, she marched over. "You didn't get HOA approval," she said sharply. "I don't need HOA approval to build a fence on my own land," I replied calmly. She glared. "We'll see about that." And that's when the letters began. 3 of them printed with HOA letterhead, claiming I was violating neighborhood uniformity. I ignored them all. I wasn't breaking any laws. But I had no idea she was planning something bigger. The morning she called the cops, I woke up to the sound of hammering wood and chirping birds. It felt peaceful, like a regular day. I didn't even notice Karen lurking near the corner of her driveway with her phone pressed to her ear. When the patrol car rolled up 20 minutes later, that peace shattered. Now, standing there watching the officer leave, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. Relief that I wasn't in the wrong, but dread because I knew Karen wasn't finished. She turned to me, her voice trembling but sharp. "You think you've won? You'll regret this. The HOA always wins." Then she stormed off down the street, leaving me staring at the fence that had caused all this chaos. I didn't realize then that the real battle hadn't even begun. Because the next morning, something happened that would make me question everything I thought I knew about my quiet little neighborhood. Something that would make me wonder if Karen was willing to go further than anyone expected. And that is where things started to unravel. The next morning started like any other. The air was cool, sunlight spilling through my kitchen window as I poured myself a cup of coffee. I looked outside toward the backyard where my fence now stood tall and steady. It felt good, like a quiet victory. But peace doesn't last long when you live next to an HOA, Karen. At first I thought I was imagining things. I heard faint footsteps outside near the fence line, slow, deliberate ones, followed by the creak of a metal gate. I stepped onto my porch and froze. Karen was standing there again, phone in hand, wearing her trademark pink visor and floral blouse. This time she wasn't yelling. She was taking pictures. Click, click, click. Every corner, every board, every inch of the fence, she photographed like she was collecting evidence for a crime scene. "Karen," I called out, trying to stay calm. "What are you doing on my property again?" She didn't even look up. "Documenting violations," she said curtly. I walked closer. "Violations of what?" "I told you yesterday. The officer already checked the survey map." She finally turned to face me, her lips curling into a smug smile. "Yes, and I checked with the HOA lawyer this morning. You might have fooled that cop, but you didn't fool me. You'll be hearing from us soon." I laughed quietly. "Karen, do yourself a favor, leave me alone." Her eyes narrowed. "You don't tell me what to do in my neighborhood," she hissed, storming off again, her phone still recording as she muttered something about community standards and unauthorized modifications. I stood there, the morning air suddenly feeling heavy. For a second, I wondered if she'd really gone to an HOA lawyer, or if this was just another bluff. But then I noticed something strange. Across the street, 2 of my other neighbors, the Johnsons and old Mr. Wells, were standing in their driveways watching. When I made eye contact, they quickly turned away, pretending to sweep or check their mail. Something about their body language felt off. Like they knew something I didn't. By noon, a white envelope appeared in my mailbox. The HOA seal was stamped neatly on the corner. I tore it open and unfolded the letter inside. "Dear resident, this is your final notice regarding your ongoing violation of HOA construction guidelines. Your unauthorized fence installation has been deemed non-compliant with neighborhood standards. Failure to remove said structure within 7 days will result in daily fines and legal escalation. Regards, HOA Board, President Karen J. Morrison." I stared at the paper, half laughing, half fuming. Unauthorized? After everything I'd done right? That was the moment I decided enough was enough. I spent the rest of the afternoon digging through my old property documents, survey maps, and county land records. I wanted more than proof. I wanted ammunition. When I found my deed, I noticed something Karen clearly hadn't. A legal note stating that my property predated the HOA itself. In other words, I wasn't legally bound by most of their rules. I sat back in my chair, smiling to myself. If Karen wanted a war, she was about to lose it. The next day I saw her again, this time with 2 other board members, Mrs. Benson, who always wore sunglasses like she was in a spy movie, and Greg, the quiet guy from the corner house. They stood on the sidewalk pointing toward my fence, whispering to each other. I could tell by the way Karen's hands were flying through the air that she was in full dictator mode. I stepped out onto my porch. "Morning, folks. Beautiful day, isn't it?" Karen didn't even bother pretending to be polite. "We've scheduled a community meeting tonight," she said sharply. "You'll want to be there. It concerns your violations." "Violations?" I said, raising an eyebrow. "You mean my fence?" She smirked, among other things. The others exchanged uneasy looks. Even Greg seemed uncomfortable. I could tell he didn't like what Karen was doing, but no one in that HOA ever dared to challenge her. That evening, I walked into the community hall. Every seat was filled, families, retirees, even a few teenagers sitting at the back with their phones out. The smell of coffee and old carpet hung in the air. Karen stood at the front of the room beside a projector screen with a slide that read, "Community Standards Enforcement, Property, 127B. My address." She clicked the remote and a photo of my fence appeared on the screen. "As you can all see," she began, her voice dripping with authority, "this resident has constructed a fence without HOA authorization, violating Section 4A of our Property Design Code." Murmurs filled the room. I stood up. "With all due respect, Karen, my fence is on my land. The police confirmed it yesterday." Karen smiled, that fake, tight-lipped smile that never reached her eyes. But the police aren't the HOA, are they?" Someone in the audience chuckled. I took a deep breath and walked to the front, holding up a manila folder. "Actually," I said, "this is my property deed, and according to the county's official land record, my home was built 2 years before this HOA was even formed." The room went silent. Karen blinked. "That's irrelevant." "No, it's not," I said. "That means your rules don't apply to me. I'm grandfathered out of the HOA." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Greg leaned over to whisper something to Karen, but she shoved him aside. "That's impossible," she snapped. "Every home in this subdivision is under HOA jurisdiction." I handed the papers to Greg. "Check the date yourself." He adjusted his glasses and frowned. "Karen, he's right." Her face turned crimson. "This is my meeting," she shouted. "I won't be disrespected in front of the community." A few people started whispering in the back. One woman even stood up and said, "If he's right, maybe we should stop harassing him." Karen's voice cracked as she tried to regain control. We'll review this further. Meeting adjourned." She stormed out of the hall, slamming the door behind her. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, half curious, half amused. I walked home that night feeling lighter than I had in weeks. But that feeling didn't last long, because when I woke up the next morning, something was wrong. I stepped outside to find my fence, half of it, torn down. The posts were ripped from the ground, nails scattered in the dirt, and a section of wood was missing completely. My jaw dropped. What in the world? Then I saw it. A note pinned to one of the broken posts. "You were warned. HOA rules are for everyone." It wasn't signed, but I didn't need to guess who wrote it. My hands trembled as I picked it up. She had crossed the line. Destroying property wasn't just an HOA violation, it was a crime. I called the non-emergency police line, and within 30 minutes a familiar car pulled up. The same officer from before stepped out, looking surprised. "Back so soon?" he said. I nodded, showing him the note. "Someone tore down part of my fence last night." He frowned, walking around the wreckage. "Looks like it was done intentionally. You got any security cameras?" I shook my head. "Not yet, but I think I know who did it." He raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess. Your neighbor Karen?" I didn't answer, but the look on my face said it all. He sighed. "All right. I'll file a report. But unless you've got footage or witnesses, this'll be hard to prove." As he spoke, I noticed something glinting near the edge of the yard. I crouched down and picked it up, a small silver bracelet. It was engraved with the initials KJM, Karen J. Morrison. The officer looked at it and let out a quiet whistle. "Well," he said, "that's interesting." I slipped the bracelet into a plastic bag and handed it to him. "Think that's enough evidence?" He smirked. "It's a start." Karen didn't know it yet, but she had just made her biggest mistake. Because now the law was officially involved, and this time, no amount of HOA letters could save her. But what I didn't realize then was that Karen wasn't going to back down. No, she was going to fight dirtier than ever before. And the next move she made would shake the entire neighborhood. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the house made me sit up. Every rustle of the trees outside made me think she was back. I kept replaying the image of that broken fence, the bracelet, and Karen's smug face in my mind. By sunrise, I was sitting on my porch with a cup of coffee, watching the mist roll off the lawn. I was exhausted but too angry to rest. The officer had filed a report, but he said they'd need more evidence before pressing charges. So I decided to get some. I drove into town and bought 2 security cameras, one for the front yard and another for the back. I mounted them myself, high enough that Karen wouldn't spot them easily. If she came snooping around again, I'd have proof this time. As I finished setting up the last camera, I heard her voice from across the street. "Well, well," she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Putting up spy gear now?" I turned to face her. She stood with her arms crossed, pretending to walk her little white dog, Daisy. "Security cameras," I said flatly, "after someone vandalized my fence." She tilted her head and smiled. "Oh, I heard about that. Terrible thing. You should be more careful about the people you make enemies with." "Is that a threat?" I asked. "Of course not," she said sweetly. "Just some friendly advice." She tugged on her dog's leash and walked away, humming. Something about her calmness made me uneasy. Karen didn't back down that easily. She always had another move, and that move came 2 days later. It started when I received a letter from the county zoning office. The letter claimed that I was being investigated for unauthorized land modification. Apparently, someone had reported me for building on protected green space. I couldn't believe it. The report said I was encroaching on public land, but I knew that was false. My fence was well within the survey boundaries. Still, I had to attend a county inspection. The day the inspector came, Karen was waiting outside again, pretending to water her flowers but clearly listening. The inspector, a polite man named Mr. Lewis, walked the property with a clipboard. "This is strange," he said, examining the boundary markers. "These reports usually come from HOAs that misunderstand county jurisdiction." "Let me guess," I said. "Karen Morrison?" He gave a little smirk. "You're not the first person she's reported this year." That didn't surprise me. After a few measurements, he closed his clipboard. "You're fine. Everything's legal. I'll file the report to close the case." Karen froze when she heard that. She actually dropped her watering can. Mr. Lewis walked past her, nodding politely. "Have a good day, ma'am." Her face turned red again, the kind of red that could rival a stop sign. When he drove off, she turned to me and hissed, "This isn't over." I smiled. "Oh, I'm counting on it." That night, I watched my camera footage for the first time. For hours, there was nothing. Just the wind blowing through the trees, headlights passing by, and the occasional raccoon wandering near the fence. Then, around midnight, I saw movement. The screen showed a figure creeping along the side of my yard, wearing dark clothes. The person stopped near the half-repaired section of the fence and shone a flashlight around. Even in the grainy image, I recognized that short, curly hair. Karen. She leaned down, pulled something from her pocket, and began spraying the fence with a can of red paint. I hit pause, heart pounding. The next frame showed her stepping back, admiring her work. And that's when I saw the words she had sprayed. HOA property. Remove immediately. My hands were shaking as I replayed it. She wasn't just harassing me. She was vandalizing my home again. I called the police station right away. The same officer from before, Officer Daniel, arrived within 20 minutes. He stared at the footage, whistled, and said, "Well, that's pretty clear." "You think this is enough to press charges?" I asked. He nodded. "Absolutely. We'll take care of this." For the first time in weeks, I felt a wave of relief. Maybe this nightmare would finally end. But the next day proved me wrong, because Karen had one last card to play, and she played it dirty. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of shouting outside. I rushed to the window and saw 3 people standing near my driveway: Karen, her lawyer, and, unbelievably, a county code enforcement officer. I stepped outside, and Karen immediately pointed at me. "That's him. He's been threatening me, trespassing on my property, and filming me without consent." I blinked. "What?" The officer looked unsure. "Sir, We've received multiple complaints. She's lying, I snapped. I have footage of her vandalizing my fence last night. Karen gasped dramatically, hand over her chest. That's ridiculous. He's making things up. I was home all night. Her lawyer stepped forward smoothly. My client has been unfairly targeted by this man's obsessive behavior. We're filing a restraining order. I felt my stomach drop. A restraining order? Are you serious? Karen smirked. Dead serious. The code officer sighed. All right, let's calm down. We'll need to review both sides' evidence. That's when I remembered something. The bracelet. The one she dropped during the fence destruction. I had handed it to the police days ago as evidence. I turned to Officer Daniel, who had just arrived after hearing the call on the radio. Officer, you remember that bracelet, right? He nodded slowly. Yes, I logged it as evidence in your vandalism report. Karen's lawyer frowned. What bracelet? Karen's face went pale. The one with your client's initials, the officer said casually. Found right where the fence was torn down. Karen stammered. That's impossible. Someone planted it. The officer raised an eyebrow. So you're saying someone else wears a bracelet with your initials on it? Karen's mouth opened, but no words came out. Her lawyer quickly stepped in. We'll be in touch, he said stiffly, tugging Karen by the arm. They left in a hurry, but not before Karen turned and glared at me one last time. Her eyes said it all. This wasn't over. As they drove away, Officer Daniel patted me on the shoulder. Don't worry, he said. The report and the footage will handle this. I nodded, but deep down, I knew Karen wasn't done. She was too stubborn, too proud. People like her didn't just stop. They doubled down. Over the next few days, things went quiet. Almost too quiet. No letters, no complaints, no late-night footsteps. It was like she had vanished. But I knew better. One night, as I was locking up, I noticed a flicker of light through my blinds. Faint, but deliberate. Someone was shining a flashlight at my window. I crept to the door and peeked outside. At first I didn't see anything, until I looked toward the street and spotted a car parked with its headlights off. Inside, someone was sitting, watching. The next morning, tire tracks appeared on my grass. Deep ones, circling the yard like someone had driven over it on purpose. I checked the cameras again, but somehow the footage from that night was gone. Deleted. That meant only one thing. Someone had tampered with them. And if they were bold enough to do that, then I was in for something much worse. Karen had taken the fight from the HOA office to the shadows, and I had no idea what she was planning next. By the time the sun dipped below the trees, I knew something bad was brewing. You could feel it in the air, the kind of stillness that makes your gut twist before a storm hits. For 3 days I hadn't seen Karen. No morning walks, no phone in hand, no fake smiles. Her house across the street looked dark at night, curtains drawn. But every so often, I'd catch the faint glow of movement through the blinds. I told myself to stay calm. Maybe she'd finally realized she couldn't win. Maybe the police report scared her straight. But then, around 9:30 p.m., I heard car doors slamming outside more than one. I stepped to the window and peeked through the curtain. 3 SUVs had pulled up along the curb. A group of people climbed out, flashlights in hand. They weren't police. They were my neighbors. And at the front of the pack, wearing a reflective vest with HOA enforcement printed across it in black letters, was Karen. I felt my chest tighten. Oh no. She raised a clipboard and called out loud enough for half the street to hear. By the authority of the Lakewood Meadows Homeowners Association, she declared, we're here to remove illegal property modifications that violate community standards. Someone in the group, probably Greg, hesitated. Karen, are you sure we can do this? He said the cops already cleared him. Karen shot him a glare sharp enough to cut glass. The HOA outranks the county when it comes to community property lines, she snapped. Now move! I rushed to the front door, swinging it open. Hey! I shouted. What do you think you're doing? Karen looked at me like a queen addressing a peasant. We're enforcing the rules you refuse to follow. Step aside. You can't touch my property, I barked. But it was too late. 2 men had already started yanking at the fence panels. Boards cracked, nails popped loose, my blood boiled. Put that down before I call the cops again. Karen folded her arms. Go ahead, she said smugly. Let's see who they side with this time. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone and dialed. The 911 operator answered, calm and steady, while I explained everything. The prior report, the vandalism, the footage, and now this. Stay inside, she told me. An officer's on the way. Karen must have heard me because she turned to her group and shouted, hurry it up. Within minutes, 3 fence panels were ripped clean off. One of them cracked right in half, falling with a loud thud onto my grass. I wanted to scream. Then headlights appeared at the end of the street. A patrol car rolled in, sirens off but lights flashing faintly. The same officer, Daniel, stepped out again. He looked tired, like a man who'd seen one too many neighbor disputes for the week. He walked up slowly, eyes scanning the scene. Evening, folks, he said. Someone want to tell me what's going on this time? Karen immediately jumped in, waving her clipboard like a badge. Officer, we're conducting an HOA-led property compliance operation. This resident's fence violates— Stop, Daniel interrupted. You're tearing down his fence? Karen blinked. We're authorized to enforce community codes. He raised an eyebrow. Authorized by who? By the HOA, she said confidently. Daniel took off his hat and rubbed his forehead. Ma'am, the HOA is not a government agency. You can't just destroy someone's property because you don't like it. Karen opened her mouth to argue, but he held up a hand. I've already seen the survey map. His fence is legal. You're trespassing and causing damage. That wiped the smugness right off her face. Officer, I said, my voice shaking with anger. I want to press charges. Daniel nodded. You have every right to. He turned back to Karen. You and anyone who helped tear this fence down could be looking at fines or even criminal mischief charges. The flashlight beams began to flicker as the neighbors lowered their tools. Greg took a nervous step back. I told you this was a bad idea, he muttered under his breath. Karen's voice trembled now. This is harassment. You can't do this to me. I'm the HOA president. Not anymore, came a voice from the back. Everyone turned. It was Mrs. Benson, the woman with the sunglasses. She stepped forward, holding a folder. We had an emergency vote tonight, she said quietly. You've been removed from your position. Karen froze. What? You can't remove me. It was unanimous, Mrs. Benson said firmly. You've embarrassed this entire neighborhood. Karen's face went pale as she looked around. The very people who once followed her were now avoiding her eyes. Officer Daniel sighed. Ma'am, I suggest you leave before I take you in for property damage. Karen didn't move at first. Her lip trembled. You're all going to regret this, she whispered. Then without another word, she turned and marched toward her car. Daisy, her little dog, barked from the passenger seat as she slammed the door and sped off into the night. The silence she left behind was deafening. Daniel looked at me, then at the wrecked fence. You okay? I nodded slowly, though my heart was still pounding. Yeah, just tired. He gave a small nod. We'll file the report. I'll make sure she's held accountable. After he left, a few neighbors lingered awkwardly. Greg walked over, scratching his head. I'm sorry, man. I didn't know she'd go that far. I sighed. It's okay. Just don't let her drag you into anything like that again. He nodded and walked off. One by one, the others did too, until I was alone again, standing in the moonlight, looking at what was left of my fence. Half of it stood tall. Half of it lay broken in the dirt. But for the first time in a long while, I felt free. Over the next few days, the story spread like wildfire. Apparently, one of the neighbors had recorded the whole HOA raid on their phone. The video made its way into the local community Facebook group, then into the news. The headline read, HOA president leads unauthorized property raid, ends in police intervention. People started calling her the fence lady online. The comments were brutal. Some said she'd gone power hungry. Others called her Karen of the Year. Karen's house stayed dark after that. Her car disappeared for days at a time. The HOA quietly replaced her with Mrs. Benson, who actually turned out to be reasonable. She came by one afternoon with a plate of cookies and said, "For what it's worth, we're sorry this happened." I thanked her, even though the wounds were still fresh. But as we chatted, I noticed something strange. Across the street, Karen's curtains moved, just slightly. Someone was watching, When I looked again, they fell shut. Mrs. Benson followed my gaze and frowned. "She hasn't been the same since that night," she said softly. "Barely talks to anyone." I shrugged. Maybe that's for the best. But deep down, I knew this story wasn't finished. People like Karen didn't just disappear quietly, and that suspicion turned out to be right. Because a week later, something new showed up in my mailbox. No name, no return address, just a single envelope sealed with red tape. I opened it carefully. Inside was a folded piece of paper. 4 words, written in messy, rushed handwriting. "You built it wrong." My blood ran cold. There was no signature, but I knew that handwriting anywhere. Karen was back, and she wasn't finished. The letter sat on my kitchen counter for hours. Its words burned into my mind like a bad omen. "You built it wrong." 4 simple words, but they carried something heavy. A warning, a threat, a promise. By sunset, I'd read it a dozen times. Each time, the handwriting told me more than the words did. The jagged lines, the uneven letters. It wasn't the confident, bossy Karen I knew. This one looked angry, desperate. I checked my security cameras again, hoping maybe they'd caught whoever dropped it off. Nothing. The footage cut off for a full 5 minutes between 2:13 and 2:18 a.m. When it resumed, the envelope was sitting neatly in my mailbox. She had tampered with the cameras again. I sat back, staring at the flickering monitor. "All right, Karen," I muttered. "What's your game this time?" It wasn't about the fence anymore. She had lost that fight. This was something else. Personal, maybe even revenge. The next morning, I noticed something new. A small orange stake had appeared near the edge of my property, driven straight into the ground beside the fence line. It wasn't mine. There was a little flag on it with the words, "Survey marker, do not remove." I frowned. Someone was trying to mark the property again. I called the county office to ask if they had sent a new survey team. They hadn't. "No recent request for your address," the clerk said. "If someone's placing markers without authorization, you should report it." I looked out the window again, the little flag flapping in the wind. It was starting all over again. That evening, I decided to check Karen's house. From the street, her place looked abandoned. The lawn was overgrown, the blinds were always drawn, and her trash bins hadn't moved in days. But as I walked closer, I saw something strange. Fresh tire tracks in her driveway. Then I noticed her garage light flicker on for a second before turning off. Someone was definitely home. I debated knocking, but stopped myself. No. I'd already given her too much of my energy. I went back home, trying to shake off the feeling. But later that night, I heard it again. Footsteps. Soft ones moving slowly along the fence. I turned off my porch light and peered out the window. The moonlight was dim, but I could make out a figure crouching near the same orange stake from earlier. They were digging. I grabbed my phone and zoomed in through the camera. The person's face lifted just enough for me to see it clearly. Karen. Her hair was messy. Her clothes were dirty, like she'd been crawling through the grass. She wasn't just marking the property. She was burying something. I called the non-emergency line again, whispering into the phone. By the time the officer arrived, she was gone. We searched the area where she'd been digging and found a small half-buried plastic container. Inside was a stack of papers, old HOA documents, letters, and photos of my house taken from different angles. The officer frowned. "Looks like she's been keeping tabs on you." I swallowed hard. "Why would she bury this?" He shrugged. "Maybe she's trying to hide evidence. Or maybe she's losing it." That last part stuck with me. Because over the next few days, things got stranger. It started with the lights. At exactly 3 a.m. every night, my porch light would flicker on by itself. I replaced the bulb, the wiring, even the switch. Nothing helped. Then I realized it wasn't just my light. Neighbors started noticing their motion lights going off too, all around the same time. Always near the street that led to Karen's house. People whispered about her at the mailbox. Some said she'd been sneaking around the neighborhood at night, muttering to herself. Others said they'd seen her car parked near the woods behind my property. I tried to ignore the gossip, but one morning I woke up to find my fence gate wide open, the one I always kept locked, and on the ground beneath it was another note. This one was short too. Just 2 words this time. Check again. I didn't understand it at first. Check what? Then it hit me. the orange stakes. I went outside and followed the line of flags again. The first one was where I remembered. But now there were more. 5, maybe 6 of them stretching in a crooked line across my property, and each one led closer toward the old creek bed at the back of my land. I followed them through the weeds until I reached the last one. It was jammed deep into the soft earth, and beside it the ground looked freshly disturbed, like someone had dug there recently. I grabbed a shovel and started digging. About a foot down, the shovel hit something hard. I knelt and brushed away the dirt. It was a small wooden box wrapped in plastic and sealed with duct tape. For a long moment I just stared at it. Then I peeled back the tape and opened it. Inside were more papers. But these weren't HOA documents. They were legal deeds. My legal deeds. Copies of my property ownership records, survey maps, and signatures. All altered. Someone had tried to forge new boundary lines that shifted a section of my property into HOA common area. I felt sick. She wasn't just harassing me. She was trying to steal my land. I called the police again, and this time, they took everything. The documents, the photos, the box. They said they'd send them to forensics, but the officer's face told me what I already knew. Someone's trying to make it look like you built that fence illegally, he said. This could get ugly if she tries to file this in court. I shook my head, still in disbelief. She's unhinged. He nodded. And desperate. The next day, my mailbox was gone. Just gone. The post was snapped clean in half, the box itself missing completely. A single piece of paper fluttered on the grass where it used to be. I picked it up. It was one of my own mail envelopes torn open with 3 words scrawled across it. I told you. That night I set up my cameras again, this time with backup storage that couldn't be deleted remotely. I aimed one directly at the fence and another toward her house. For a while nothing happened. The night stayed quiet, the wind whispering through the trees. But on the 4th night, just past midnight, the motion alert pinged. I sat up in bed and checked the feed. There she was again. Karen. She was standing right at the edge of my fence, barefoot, her white robe glowing faintly under the security light. She was staring directly into the camera. Not moving, not speaking. Just staring. The video ran for nearly 2 minutes before she finally stepped backward and vanished into the dark. I called Officer Daniel again first thing in the morning. When I showed him the footage, he frowned deeply. "We'll bring her in," he said. "She's clearly violating the restraining order." But later that day, something unexpected happened. Daniel called me back. His voice sounded different, quiet, almost uneasy. "Mr. Sanders," he said slowly, "we went by her house." "Yeah? Did you get her?" There was a pause. "Not exactly. The house is empty. And according to the neighbors, Karen moved out 2 weeks ago." I froze. "What? That's impossible. I saw her last night." "I know," he said. "But here's the thing. Her car's still in the driveway, her phone's on the counter, and there's no sign of her anywhere." The line went quiet for a moment before he added, "You might want to check your cameras again tonight, just in case." I hung up, my hands shaking. If Karen really was gone, then who was standing outside my fence last night? That night, I didn't even try to sleep. I sat in the living room with every light on, the glow of the security monitor flickering on the coffee table. Outside, the crickets hummed like they didn't know the world was falling apart just a few yards away. Karen was gone. The police said she'd moved out. But I knew what I saw. That pale robe. That face staring straight into the lens. You don't forget eyes like that. Midnight crept in slow. I stared at the monitor so long that the static hum began to sound like breathing. Then, just as the clock hit 12:47 a.m., the motion alert chimed again. Ping. My stomach turned. I clicked the feed open and froze. There she was. The same figure in white, standing in the exact same spot near the broken fence post, the same tilt of the head, the same stillness. But this time, she wasn't alone. In the shadows behind her, there was another shape. A taller one. A man, standing perfectly still, half hidden by the trees. The woman, Karen, turned slowly, as if listening to something he whispered. Then she pointed straight at my house. The camera glitched, lines of static ripping through the feed. When the picture cleared, they were both gone. I bolted up, grabbed my flashlight, and ran outside before I could talk myself out of it. The night air was cold, damp with the smell of wet grass. I swept the beam across the yard, my pulse pounding in my ears. The fence was there, still half repaired, the boards creaking softly in the wind. No one was around. But then I saw it. Right where Karen had been standing, someone had pressed something into the dirt. A muddy footprint. Barefoot. Small. And next to it, another print. Larger. A man's shoe. I crouched down, my breath fogging in the air. The ground around the prints was disturbed, like something heavy had been dragged. Then, just a few feet away, I spotted something shiny half buried in the mud. I dug it out. A key. Rusty. Tied with a red ribbon. I turned it over and my heart nearly stopped. The tag attached read, Lakewood HOA Storage, Shed 4. The next morning I drove straight to the HOA storage units at the edge of the neighborhood. There were 5 small metal sheds lined up behind the community center, each with a padlock. Shed 4 looked like it hadn't been opened in months. Weeds crawled up the base, and cobwebs clung to the door handle. I tried the key. It fit perfectly. The lock clicked open, and the door creaked as I pushed it. A faint smell of mildew and paper filled the air. Inside were stacks of boxes, old signs, paint buckets, and dusty file cabinets marked with faded labels. HOA records, member complaints, infractions. But in the back corner something caught my eye, a large plastic container labeled Karen Archive. I hesitated. Then I opened it. Inside were hundreds of printed photos, not of the neighborhood but of me. My house, my fence, my truck, my backyard. Even pictures of me mowing the lawn, grilling, walking to the mailbox. Each photo had notes scribbled on the back in Karen's handwriting. Fence height exceeds HOA limit. Possible illegal shed. Observed talking to Mrs. Benson. Surveillance recommended. And at the bottom of the stack, a single sheet of paper. A typed report labeled Project Boundary Restoration Plan. It outlined some insane idea about reclaiming community property lost to unlawful boundary creep. And under the target properties section, mine was listed first. There was also a hand-drawn map, my lot highlighted in red, with a second smaller red mark drawn near the woods behind my house. It was labeled Phase 2. I didn't even have time to process it before I heard something outside. A car door slamming. I froze, heart racing. Through the small window of the shed, I saw the familiar white SUV, Karen's SUV, parked just outside the gate. I ducked behind a stack of boxes, peeking through a crack. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out. He was tall in a gray hoodie and jeans wearing black gloves. He looked around carefully, then opened the passenger door. Karen climbed out. Her face was pale, her hair disheveled, but it was her. She looked exhausted, but her eyes, those sharp, calculating eyes, still burned with fury. "You're sure it's still here?" the man whispered. She nodded, clutching a folder. "It has to be. He doesn't know about Phase 2 yet." I held my breath as they walked toward the storage sheds. They stopped right outside, at Shed 4. Karen frowned. "The lock's open." The man cursed under his breath. "You said no one knew." "I thought no one did," she hissed. "Hurry, we'll take what we can and go." I needed to move. If they found me here, it'd be my word against hers again. I crawled toward the back corner, where a small maintenance door led to the outside. It was locked from the inside, but the old metal latch broke with a soft snap when I pushed. I slipped out quietly, heart hammering, and crept along the side of the building. Behind me, I could hear them rummaging through the boxes. Then Karen's voice rang out, louder now. "It's gone. Someone's taken it." The man snarled, "We have to go now." Their footsteps pounded toward the SUV. I hid behind a tree as they sped off, the taillights vanishing down the road. When I got home, I called Officer Daniel immediately and told him everything. The shed, the photos, the documents, the SUV. He came over an hour later, and this time he brought backup. They searched the HOA storage lot and confirmed everything. The photos, the files, the forged plans. But here's the part that made everyone's skin crawl. The red mark on that Phase 2 map behind my house? The officers went out there the next day. What they found was a dugout pit, about 6 feet wide and 3 feet deep, covered loosely with leaves and dirt. When they cleared it, there was a tarp, a shovel, and a bundle of old wooden fence boards tied together. The same boards Karen's group had torn down weeks earlier. At first, they thought that was it. until one of the officers lifted the tarp and found something else. A folder. Inside were property transfer forms, fake signatures, and, horrifyingly, a printed email draft addressed to the county clerk, with my name and property number in the subject line. The message read, "Attached are revised documents for property reassignment. Please process under HOA authority as discussed." But it was unsigned. Officer Daniel rubbed his temples. "She was going to try to transfer ownership of part of your land." I stared at the folder, disbelief turning to anger. "She was stealing it." He nodded slowly. "And the man with her, we identified him. Her cousin. Used to be a surveyor. Lost his license 2 years ago for falsifying documents." It all made sense now. The fake survey stakes. The buried box. The photos. The late-night digging. She had planned this from the start. That night I sat on my porch, staring at the fence, still half broken, still standing. The crickets had gone quiet. Even the air felt different, heavy, like the neighborhood was holding its breath. Then I heard it again. The sound of slow footsteps. I grabbed my flashlight and stood up, scanning the yard. "Karen?" I shouted into the darkness. "If that's you, it's over. They know everything." Silence. Then, from beyond the fence, a voice. Faint, trembling, almost a whisper. "You took what was ours." I froze. The light flickered as I turned toward the sound. Nothing but the woods. But I swear, for just a second I saw something move among the trees. A flash of white fabric, a glint of red ribbon. And then it was gone. The next morning, Officer Daniel called again. "We've got more news," he said. "We found her car abandoned near the creek. No sign of her or her cousin. But we'll keep looking." He paused. "You might want to be careful for a while." I stared out at the fence, the same fence that started it all. A fence that was meant to keep people out, but now it felt like it was keeping something in. The next few days passed in a blur of sirens, whispers, and sleepless nights. News of Karen's disappearance spread across Lakewood Meadows like wildfire. The neighborhood that once tiptoed around her name now spoke it in hushed, fearful tones. No one saw her leave. No cameras caught her driving away. No one even knew how she vanished. The only thing left behind was her white SUV, the keys still in the ignition, parked near the old creek bed. That same creek bed ran behind my property, the same place she'd been digging that night. And though the police told me to stay inside and let the investigation proceed, I couldn't. Not when every time I looked out my back window, I swore I saw the faint outline of that red survey flag still fluttering near the trees. Something in me needed answers. That evening I grabbed a flashlight, gloves, and a shovel, and headed for the creek. The sun was long gone, but the moon was bright enough to paint everything in silver and shadow. As I walked through the tall grass, I felt that uneasy chill again, the one that made the air too quiet, too still. Even the crickets seemed to have gone silent. When I reached the creek, the ground was soft and wet beneath my boots. The hole the police had dug up was still there, half filled with rainwater. But beside it, maybe 5 feet away, the soil looked freshly disturbed again. Someone had been here after the police left. I crouched down, brushed away the leaves, and found another wooden marker jammed into the mud, this one carved with the letters, K.M. Karen Morrison. I swallowed hard. "You've got to be kidding me." The shovel bit into the earth with a dull thud. The smell of damp dirt filled the air as I dug deeper. At first it was just mud and roots, until I hit something solid. I knelt and pulled away the soil with my hands. It was a small metal box, old, rusted, and heavy. The lid was secured with 2 latches, both caked in mud. My fingers trembled as I pried them open. Inside was a stack of papers wrapped in plastic, and under that, something that made my stomach twist. A phone. Karen's phone. It was cracked but intact. I wiped off the dirt and hit the power button. To my shock, it turned on, dimly flickering, the battery almost dead. The lock screen lit up. A photo of her and her little dog Daisy, smiling in front of the HOA office. I didn't know her passcode, but when I swiped up, it asked for a fingerprint. The dirt-streaked home button was smeared, but there was one faint print still visible. I hesitated. Then I pressed my thumb against it, and to my surprise, it unlocked. The screen opened to the camera app. The last video was time-stamped 2 nights ago. I tapped play. At first, the video was dark, just the sound of leaves crunching, heavy breathing, and Karen's voice whispering, "It's here. It's right here." Then a beam of light swept across the ground, illuminating the same creek bed I was standing in. She turned the camera toward herself, her face pale and wild-eyed. "They think it's just about the fence," she whispered. "But it's more than that. He doesn't understand. The map was wrong. The line was moved. They built over it. They don't know what's buried under here." My heart pounded. "What's buried?" I muttered. Then the video shook violently. A man's voice shouted from behind the camera. Low, angry. "Stop recording. You're going to get us caught," Karen screamed. The camera fell to the ground. The last thing it captured was the beam of a flashlight spinning wildly before cutting to black. I stood there, cold sweat dripping down my neck. Something was buried here. Something she didn't want anyone to find. I dug deeper, moving the mud faster now, my flashlight wobbling. About a foot below where the phone had been, I hit something else. A large, flat object. I brushed the dirt away. A wooden plank. No, not a plank. A lid. The edge of a wooden box, buried deep in the ground. I pressed my hand against it. It was old, damp, and heavy. The smell that rose from it was faint but unmistakable. Rot. I froze. Part of me wanted to stop right there, to call the police, to let them handle it. But another part of me, the part that had been dragged through weeks of chaos, lies, and fear, needed to know. I wedged the shovel under the lid and pushed. The wood creaked, cracked, and finally split open. My flashlight flickered over the contents. At first all I saw was dirt. Then as I brushed it aside, a shape emerged. Fabric. Then bone. A skull. I stumbled back, gasping for breath, the flashlight shaking in my hand. The skull was small, not animal small, human small. The sockets were hollow, the jaw cracked. Beside it, tangled in the dirt, was a second skull. Larger. 2 of them. I dropped the shovel and stumbled backward until my foot hit something else half buried. Another wooden stake. Only this one didn't have a name carved into it. It just had 3 words, carved rough and shallow. They know now. I don't remember running back to my house. I just remember slamming the door, locking it, and sitting on the floor, shaking uncontrollably. It took everything in me to call 911. My voice cracked as I told them what I found. Within 30 minutes, my property was flooded with red and blue lights again. Officer Daniel was there, his face pale as I led him to the site. When they uncovered the box completely, it became clear. 2 skeletons, both decades old. A man and a child. The coroner said the remains were likely 20 to 25 years old. Daniel knelt beside me as they carried the bodies out. "You didn't know anything about this, right?" I shook my head. "Of course not. I bought this land 5 years ago. Who were they?" He sighed. "We'll have to run tests. But if Karen knew about this, it might explain everything." The next morning, the news trucks arrived. "Remains discovered behind HOA president's former home," the headlines read. "Police investigate possible 1990s cold case." Neighbors came out in clusters, whispering and pointing toward my house. Mrs. Benson stopped by, her face pale. I don't understand," she said quietly. "Do you think Karen knew those people?" I didn't answer. Because later that day, while the police were packing up, one of the forensics officers handed me something they found near the creek. It was an old photograph, water damaged but still visible. Karen standing with a man I didn't recognize. Between them, a little girl. The same girl from the smaller skeleton. The back of the photo had writing on it. "Lakewood Meadow Lot 17. Our forever home. Lot 17. That was my address. That night I sat on my porch, staring at the creek again. The police tape fluttered in the wind. The air smelled like rain and old secrets. And for the first time since moving there, I realized the fence hadn't just marked my property line. It had marked a grave. I leaned back in my chair, exhausted. The crickets had returned, chirping faintly in the distance. Then my phone buzzed. A text message. Unknown number. No name. No photo. Just one message. "You shouldn't have dug it up." I stared at the screen. The timestamp said 3:03 a.m. I looked outside. By the fence, barely visible under the moonlight, a figure in white stood again. Motionless. Watching. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that white figure by the fence, still, silent, waiting. The text message replayed in my mind over and over. You shouldn't have dug it up. By morning, my phone showed no record of the message. It was gone, like it had never been sent. But I knew what I saw. The police cordon stayed around the creek all night. Officer Daniel came by early, looking like he hadn't slept either. He stood on my porch, coffee in hand, eyes heavy. You all right? He asked. Not really, I said quietly. Did they find anything else? He hesitated before answering. We found a wedding ring. It belonged to a man named Harold Morrison. I blinked. Morrison? He nodded slowly. Karen's husband. According to county records, he disappeared in 2001. Never found. My heart stopped. Wait, the skeleton? He sighed. DNA's still pending, but yeah, it matches the timeline. I leaned back against the porch railing, trying to process. And the little girl? Daniel looked away. We think that's Emily, their daughter. She went missing the same year. I covered my mouth. You're telling me that was her family buried behind my fence? He nodded grimly. Looks that way. The wind rustled the trees behind us, and for a second I thought I saw that flash of white again. But when I turned, it was gone. Over the next few days, the neighborhood changed. The gossip stopped. The laughter stopped. Even the HOA sign by the front entrance came down. No one wanted to be reminded. The investigation uncovered something darker than anyone expected. According to old police reports, Harold and Karen's marriage had been falling apart in the late 90s. Neighbors back then said they argued constantly, mostly about money and land issues. Harold had worked for a land survey company that helped map out Lakewood Meadows before it was built. Then, one night in 2001, Harold and Emily disappeared. Karen told police they'd run off, and the case went cold. Until now. Now it was clear they hadn't left at all. They'd been buried here, under what would later become my backyard. When I read the report, one detail made my stomach turn. The old property lines from the original survey, the real ones, showed that the area where the bodies were found used to be part of Karen's property before it was redrawn. It wasn't just guilt that brought her to my fence. It was memory. She wasn't trying to steal my land. She was trying to reclaim her past. That night, the wind howled through the trees. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching again. At around 2:30 a.m., I heard it. Knocking. Not on my front door. On the fence. 3 soft, deliberate knocks. I grabbed my flashlight and crept to the window. The light flicked across the boards. Nothing. Then, from the backyard, the faint sound of a woman crying. I froze. It wasn't loud, more like a whisper carried by the wind. I stepped outside, my heart racing. The yard was quiet. The moon hung low, casting pale light across the grass. Karen? I called softly. No answer. But then I saw it. At the base of the fence, near the old marker. Something small, glinting in the moonlight. I walked closer. It was a pendant, a gold locket, half buried in the dirt. I picked it up and opened it. Inside was a tiny photo of Karen, Harold, and their daughter Emily, all smiling. And beneath the photo, a date scratched in faintly. April 12th, 2001, the day they disappeared. I backed away slowly, clutching the locket. That's when I noticed it. Footprints. Bare, muddy ones, leading from the creek to the fence, and stopping right where I stood. But there were no footprints leading away. The next morning I took the locket to the police. They bagged it as evidence, but Daniel looked uneasy. She's gone, he said quietly. We found her cousin's body this morning. I stared at him. What? Down by the creek, he continued. Looks like he fell and hit his head. Karen wasn't with him. I didn't know what to say. Part of me felt relief. The other part felt dread. She's still out there, isn't she? I asked. He didn't answer. That night I dreamed of the creek, the same soft crying, the same whispers. When I woke up, my phone was buzzing. It was an unknown number again. Another text. It's not over. I jumped up, heart pounding, and looked outside. The sky was pale gray, early dawn, but in the distance near the edge of the woods I saw movement. Someone was standing there again, not moving, watching. I stormed outside, shouting, "Karen, I know what happened! You don't have to hide!" No answer. But as I got closer, I realized something strange. The figure wasn't moving at all. It wasn't breathing. It was a scarecrow, a wooden cross staked into the ground, dressed in a white robe with a paper mask for a face. A sign hung around its neck. She belongs to the land. I stumbled back, goosebumps crawling across my skin. Whoever put it there knew what happened. But why put it on my property? That night, I couldn't shake the words from my head. She belongs to the land. I started digging through the county archives again. Old maps, construction records, ownership transfers. Anything I could find about Lakewood Meadows. Then I found it. A document dated 2002, the year after Harold and Emily disappeared. It was a land reassignment contract. The property known as Lot 17 had been legally redrawn, cutting off a portion of Karen's old backyard and merging it with an adjacent plot to make space for the community walking trail. The signature approving the change? Karen Morrison. But there was one problem. The date next to her signature was May 2002, a full year after her husband and daughter had gone missing, and 2 months after her psychiatric admission to a facility in another state. She couldn't have signed it. Someone forged her name. And whoever did that, they buried her family to cover it up. The truth hit me like a punch to the gut. Karen had spent years trying to prove the land was stolen. Because it was. When she came back and saw my fence, she thought I was just another thief taking what was hers. The HOA had known all along. That's why she fought them so hard. That's why they wanted her gone. And now, all these years later, the ghosts she tried to warn me about were still haunting the land. And her, too. That evening, I walked back to the fence. The scarecrow was gone. Just an empty patch of grass and a few broken sticks. But in its place, pressed into the dirt, was the gold locket I'd turned in to the police. It was open again. Inside was the same family photo, only now the faces were different. Karen's face was gone. Just a smear where her smile had been. The night after finding that locket again, I couldn't take it anymore. Every creak in the house felt alive, every gust of wind whispering her name. I sat on the porch, flashlight in one hand, phone in the other, watching the fence line like a sentry waiting for something he couldn't see. At exactly 3:03 a.m., the same time every strange thing had happened, the motion sensor light clicked on. The yard glowed pale yellow, and there she was. Karen, barefoot, in that same white robe, hair tangled, eyes hollow. She wasn't angry anymore. She looked broken. Sad. Her lips moved, but I couldn't hear her words over the wind. I stepped off the porch slowly. Karen, I know about Harold and Emily. I know what happened. She stared at me, tears streaking her dirt-covered face. They took everything, she whispered. The land, my family. My life. Her voice was faint, almost drowned by the rustle of the trees. I tried to tell them, she said, looking toward the creek. But they buried the truth. They made me sign it. They said it would all go away. Then her gaze shifted to the fence, the line that divided my property from hers. You built it right on top of them, she whispered. My heart pounded. Karen, you didn't kill them, did you? Her face twisted in pain. I buried what they left me. They told me it was an accident. But I heard them that night, arguing. He tried to stop them. Who, Karen? I asked. Who killed them? Her eyes filled with tears as she looked past me. The board, she said. The old HOA board. They wanted the land. Harold said no. They made sure he'd never stand in their way again. A chill went through me. The same HOA that later branded her a problem. They'd covered up a murder. Suddenly the light flickered. I turned toward the house, and when I looked back, she was gone. Just like that. The only thing left was the faint echo of her voice carried by the wind. Set them free. At sunrise, I went to the creek one last time. The police had finished their work days ago, but I still felt pulled there like something unfinished was waiting for me. The dirt looked undisturbed, until I noticed a corner of the ground where the soil had cracked open from the rain. Something metallic glinted beneath the mud. I knelt, brushing it away carefully. It was a rusted piece of metal, the tip of a shovel. Not one of mine. When I pulled it out, a thin piece of paper was stuck to the handle. Old, crumbling, but still readable. It was a letter. To whoever owns this land after me. If you find this, Please understand. I didn't want to hurt anyone. I only wanted the truth to stay buried because it's all I had left. They made me keep quiet, but Harold and Emily are home now. Please don't move the fence. Let them rest. KM. My throat tightened. The last thing she ever wrote wasn't hate. It was guilt. Regret. I stood there for a long time, the morning sun breaking through the trees, lighting the fence that had caused all this pain. Then I picked up the shovel and drove it into the ground, not to dig up, but to rebuild. One by one, I replaced the old boards, sealing the line where the truth had slept for decades. When I was done, I hung something on the new gate, Karen's gold locket. It swayed gently in the breeze, catching the light. I whispered, "You're free now." The wind stilled. The air grew calm. For the first time in weeks, it felt like peace. That night I slept without fear. No footsteps, no knocking, no shadows by the fence. But just before dawn, a soft sound woke me, tapping on glass. I opened my eyes to see a faint reflection in the window. A woman's silhouette, standing outside, looking in. For a second, I couldn't breathe. Then the figure raised her hand slowly and pointed toward the creek. I blinked, and she was gone. When I stepped outside, the fog was thick, the air cool and damp. I followed the faint prints leading to the back of the yard, right to the fence. On the other side, pressed into the mud, was a new wooden stake. No flag, no marker, just a single word carved into it. Thanks. And beneath it, a fresh patch of soil, smooth, untouched. I didn't dig this time. I didn't need to. I knew whatever was buried there wasn't meant to be disturbed again. A month later, the HOA officially dissolved. The neighbors wanted nothing to do with what had happened. The old members moved away quietly. Mrs. Benson sold her house and never looked back. But me? I stayed. I fixed up the fence, planted wildflowers along the line, and every evening, when the sun dipped low and the breeze brushed through the trees, I swore I could hear laughter. Faint, gentle, like a family reunited somewhere just beyond sight. The fear was gone, the guilt too. What was left was peace. And sometimes late at night, when the moonlight hits the locket just right, I still see her reflection, smiling softly before fading away. Karen wasn't evil. She was broken. And in trying to protect what was hers, she'd become a ghost tied to the land that destroyed her. But in the end, she got what she wanted. The truth unearthed, the boundary restored, her family home again. And maybe, just maybe, she found the peace she'd been chasing all those years. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments if you felt the ending. Because in Lakewood Meadows, every fence hides a story. And some never stay buried forever.